Thanks for coming in again, being here today. We're going to try to put a lot of the things that we talked about yesterday and some of the presenters talked about yesterday around personalization and kind of data and everything else into context and try to kind of see how we can connect that with real examples of actually work that we do day to day. So that's kind of the idea of the workshop, and I'm going to get going here in just a second. Just very quickly, kind of give an overview of personalizing the experience, the student experience, why that's important. Tie back to a couple of the presentations that we did the other day. We're going to talk about enrollment and one of the things that we haven't really touched on is like how data powers a lot of the things that we need to do. And then we'll talk about persona modeling, right? So how do we kind of build these cohorts and how do we build these personalized targeted groups that we can go after? So we're going to talk why that's important, tied back to how do we think about the data that we need to do that, and then how do we actually go through the process of building these personas. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is how can we then take that knowledge or those groups and then think about how do we activate them into the CRM. In this case, I'm going to show a couple of examples of Element. So why personalizing the prospective student experience? I think if you were during yesterday's presentation in the morning and during our keynote, the game has changed. I actually borrowed this slide from those keynotes yesterday. The game has changed. Today's game is about relevance, not potential reach. The shift requires a new mindset. So long are the days where we are sending mass emails out, not personalized. Everybody gets the same message. We're just getting content out there. The way we like to describe that is that it's more of a cable model, right, versus a Netflix model. Whereas cable television, it's all about the provider that you're on their schedule, you're on their timeline, you're getting the content pre-scheduled. You have no ability. You're going to get that whatever content they're putting on, and it's going to be on their timeline. Versus a Netflix model where it's all about you get what you want when you want it. And by the way, Netflix learns about you and then it personalizes that content for you. Not just the content, but also the creative. It personalizes the timing and everything else. So that's kind of the experiences that we're, trying to get to. And, if you remember yesterday, I wanted to pull up a couple other things in here. As you look from the student's perspective, it's like they also are changing, right? So you need to take the consumer into the mindset as well. So if your website looks like it was like 10 years ago, how am I supposed to trust? So some of these quotes were from students that Enrollify and Zach mentioned yesterday, but it kind of goes to the point of, the experiences need to be great, they need to be personalized, they need to, be relevant in order for that student to essentially build trust with your brand, build trust with your school. So of course there's a lot of other ones in there. It's like if it's not aesthetically pleasing, I won't pay attention to it. It's not just the aesthetics, right? It's also the relevance, right? The relevant messaging as well. I can't find what I'm looking for in 5 seconds, I'm out. So you have to make content that really, talks to what they're needing in that context that they're needing it, rather than kind of, hey, I need to put out a paragraph email out there because, I just want to throw everything in. But you know what? The effectiveness of that basically goes down to zero because nobody reads it. And of course, it's like you get the other ones where if it's not necessarily personalized or it's not, we talk about parent communications, and we talk about the audience and who we're sending stuff to. And that's very relevant to a lot of the things that we'll talk about, or the persona modeling building, right? Because it's not just the creative or content, it's also who you're talking to. So you need to change all of that. Now, with that being said, the game today is one on relevance. So I wanted to highlight this a lot because relevance, what Wanda talked about yesterday around relevance is it's top of mind, not just for us as a technology company and for us as a higher education industry, but it is actually relevant and it's top of mind for all brands, right? Every brand right now is trying to to get your attention. Every brand is trying to get that 5-second, 10-second attention from you, so they kind of cut through. So the only way that you can do that is through relevance, right? We're essentially, billed as are humans as, social creatures, and there's an intrinsic trust that goes along with that is our groups. So if we don't know you, if I don't know that that I can trust you, then there is really we're kind of shut off, right? So by building relevance, by being personalized, by basically saying, hey, I know you, and let me show you how I know you, and that's being personal, that's kind of how trust gets built, and then that's how that opens up then the possibility for more and more meaningful engagements. This is another slide from yesterday's, from Wanda's presentation, and basically kind of takes that approach of how do we better define who we speak to, and kind of how we reach them, right? So the work that they're doing in VaynerMedia around other brands is actually kind of translated really nicely into the work that we're doing and kind of the cohorts. We call them personas, we can call them cohorts, however we want to talk about them. But ultimately, it's all about, kind of the overall audience, and then how do we kind of build these groups of people that we feel we have targeted messaging around, that they're different enough that they need messaging that, it's actually going to move them towards action, right? So there's a lot of, when we talk about personas today, we're gonna talk about it not in a incredibly deep way. However, we're gonna talk about it in more approachable, way where, we can actually get these things done and not spend a tremendous amount of time and effort into kind of digging in data and have data scientists on staff, or have creatives who are building this niche groups and so on and so forth. All right, so with that being said, the last part that I brought in here, this is from JC's presentation. He actually didn't show this slide because he was actually kind of cut off for time, but this was like, how does measurement fit into all of this, right? We will actually start today's presentation the other way around, talking about data first, right? And then we're going to go into the personas, and then we're going to go into the activation component, because it starts with a lot of data, right? It starts with how do we know what, how to build these personas? How do we separate these groups around? We're not just going to go in and say, okay, you know what, we want to. We could do that, but in a lot of cases, we're going to need to go in and say, okay, how do we target this particular group? What are the data points that we're going to need there? And how we're going to go through that. So this slide talks a little bit about the power of contextual creative, right? So it talks about, essentially, the intelligence part of how do we, what do we know about these people? We need to understand them. It talks about the performance, is our messaging working, right? And then the different channels, and then bringing all of that together in order for us to essentially get what we want out of it. Now, this is in the context of kind of Vayner and how they think about their architecture of their campaigns, but it has a lot of different components in here that are very relevant to us as well. And of course, the intelligence part is really important, because we need to understand that, and of course the measurement and how we bring that data in. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it off to Damien. He's going to kind of take you guys through some of the ideas around enrollment analytics, kind of what we, how we think about it, and then he's going to get into some details as well. So Damien.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me all right? Fantastic. So I went back to my room after yesterday's conference. I checked my email. The people have spoken. You wanted data analytics at 9 a.m. You're a really eager bunch. I appreciate that that's what you're looking for. So as Ardis said, we want to start with foundations. We want to talk about the context and why this matters. For a lot of folks in this room, you've been in admissions, recruitment, enrollment management for a while, and so this might be refresher, this might be recap, this might be your everyday life, and I apologize for that. But we we want to make sure that we're setting this foundation, this context, so you understand as we go forward, as we start talking about persona modeling, we're taking those big ideas that Wanda and folks talked about yesterday and really crystallizing it into something that hopefully you can take back with you. So quickly, just enrollment analytics is a set of data reporting, analysis, and modeling techniques employed to identify trends, understand student intent, and improve outcomes in recruitment, yield, and retention. Fancy way to say it's all the things behind the scenes to interpret data, to really become data informed, and make sure that you're making strategic decisions. And so let's talk about this. Again, refresher for a lot of folks in the room. This is going to seem really familiar, but the enrollment funnel. And so considering the enrollment funnel, thinking about it, we start with a large pool of students at the top. And as it continues down through, we end up going through applicants and admits, commits, whether that's deposits or orientations or whatever you use to measure it at your campus. And then finally, enrollees. This is very much traditional funnel. This is, I was on campus for 15 years. This is what I was used to. And it's all right. It's a good model. It absolutely makes sense, but is very narrow in scope. It assumes that it's linear. It assumes that it's one direction, and it assumes that all students go through all the same stages as every other student. And so if they progress linearly, it's a great model. But especially now, I think that the trends in higher education and admissions and recruitment, what happens when a student changes their student type from a dual enrollment student to a first-year student, a transfer student? Maybe you're introducing non-degree pathways, certificates, concentrations, and other things. Maybe you're an institution that has multiple campuses, multiple locations. So lots of things can change. And once that starts to happen, your nice, neat funnel starts to look a little bit like this. And the student who was a commit or even an enrollee, a student who attended your institution, now is back at that prospect phase. And so we'll talk a lot in this presentation about the enrollment funnel. Just keep in mind that the enrollment funnel is kind of this narrow view of it. It's this one-way linear within a very narrow segment of time. Really, how we tend to look at it is more of an enrollment flow. It's not as nice and neat. I couldn't even come up with a good diagram for a PowerPoint, but it's also something that takes into account really the modern realities of enrollment management. It's something that looks at multiple enrollment journeys, and so whether that's a student filling out multiple applications in the same term or across multiple terms, multiple campuses, different student types. Thinking about expanding pathways. Again, all the things that have been really recent in enrollment with dual enrollment, certificate programs, re-engagement. How many of you are working on re-engagement campaigns of students, especially post-pandemic, when we're looking at all these students who took a year or stopped out, lost track of them in general, trying to re-engage. Current students who are with you that were non-retained, and we're looking to make sure that we're reaching out to them, providing those supports, those resources that we can. That's part of this enrollment flow that isn't tackled by a regular funnel. And finally, looking at holistic student life cycle. Ardis talked yesterday about our goal at Element is to provide something that really looks at the entire journey of a student. And so the enrollment flow includes things like that. What is their first year engagement? How are they being retained? As they continue to graduation and then become alumni, how are we working with them? How are we engaging them? How are we making sure that they're still connected to this? So why do I mention all of this? Why are we talking about this at 9 in the morning? To make sure that this is kind of foundational. This is underpinning a lot of the work that goes into data, including persona modeling, where we'll get to shortly. And so you think about the enrollment funnel or the enrollment flow, and it's to understand the volume and the rates, the conversion rates of your institution, to craft a profile, to get a good sense of what your institution is doing. Also to identify point-in-time trends. So I know everyone's looking for, well, how does this compare point in time to what we were doing last term, 2 terms ago, again, pre-pandemic? What does this look like? And to monitor progress towards institutional goals or Board of Regents goals or all the number of KPIs that you might be beholden to. And so, again, foundational level, that's why we're interested in the enrollment funnel. But there's also kind of advanced techniques, other things that you can do with that sort of data that are important processes. So previously, I worked at a large public institution as director of enrollment analytics, and some of the things that I worked on: enrollment forecasting for predictive modeling, trying to figure out, here are the trends that we've seen in the past. What can we anticipate for certain demographics, certain territories? So recruitment territory management. Everyone has seen very different staffing patterns. If you're in admissions, recruitment, enrollment, you've seen really different staffing patterns over the last couple of years. You're limited on resources, which has always been a truth, but probably never more than right now. And so understanding, how can we best allocate those resources? How can we create territories that are as efficient and effective as possible? And that also, again, starts with the enrollment funnel and the data that you're using. Net tuition revenue and financial aid strategy. This was a large one at my institution. How can we support students, diversify the class, bring in high quality students, but also open our institution for access? Oh yeah, and make money at the same time to make sure we can stay open, keep our doors open. Big problems, and again, it all comes back to how students are going through that flow or funnel. Student behavioral models, and this is one that, a lot of what I'm talking about, Element is doing on the back end, trying to help you through these processes. We do engagement scoring in Element, and I'll show you that in a couple of slides, kind of the things that we're taking a look at behind the scenes. But, JC talked about this as well. What are the behaviors of students? What are they doing? What can we interpret from those actions? And then finally, persona modeling, which I'll leave to Mike and Ardis. So, now we've talked about it in the context of enrollment management, let's take another step back and talk about data analytics in general. So this is what I was in my email, this is what you wanted, right? It's a process of collecting, cleaning, organizing, refining, examining, and summarizing data in a way that enables understanding and informed action. Again, that's what we're looking for. We want to make sure that it's actionable. We're interpreting all of this vast amounts of data, and we want to have something that is synthesized, something that we can go away with and take some action. So within Element, we have traits, these features of students. And so in data analytics, we have feature engineering. We collect a lot of raw data, and sometimes it takes some steps to really transform it to get value out of it. And there's a number of processes. If you're interested in this, we've run a couple of enrollment analytics certificate courses through Element. We'll probably run another in the future. Definitely encourage it. JC ran the first cohort. JC and I co-taught the second cohort. We go into a lot of this data, a lot of these processes. And so if you're interested in these techniques, if you're interested in learning more, certainly encourage you to keep an eye out for that. But some of the things that we can do to transform this data: feature creation. And so this is taking the raw data and creating new fields, new features, things that might have more value than the raw data itself. Binary flags, so taking something that has a value, yes or no, true or false, 0 or 1, and transforming it into something that's either more readily available or can be digested by more advanced processes, machine learning, and things like that. Binning, so lots of you probably look at GPA scales, maybe test scores, and these are things that have these long continuous scales that might be helpful to bin, to put into groups, high, medium, low, or things like that. And so binning is a way to break it down and take this thing that there's tons of values and simplify the process. Again, make it easier to segment, and that segmentation then becomes personalization. Normalization, handling outliers, imputation, handling missing values. Again, other things that are really important to bring in third-party data, to handle missing data, to clean up the data that you have. So a couple of examples of that, just to show some of the things I just talked about. If you start with raw data and you're starting with just timestamps for when a student's admitted or when they've deposited, you can then do some feature engineering. Create these flags, binary flags. It's a 1 if they have a date, it's a 0 if they don't. But then you can do some more advanced things. Look at the difference between those timestamps. Look at the duration. Again, this is something that Element does behind the scenes. We try to make it easier. But the way that you communicate with these students then looks very different. The things that you want to reach out to for a student that's between these stages for 28 days versus someone that hasn't deposited after more than 200 days looks very different. The messaging that you're providing is very different. Another example of feature engineering. I talked about binning, and so maybe for financial aid, scholarship, something like that, you're looking both at GPA and ACT scores. You can take that broad range of scores and look at the different groups. Again, this is high, medium, low on both of those scales. Put them against each other, and now you've got 9 groups. You might have another for those who haven't provided a GPA, haven't provided test scores or something like that. But again, allows for good analysis to be able to see what are the trends within these groups. And as promised, feature engineering, excuse me, feature engineering in terms of scoring, taking these raw values that we have, taking complex processes and trying to distill it into a single value. And so something that Element does is create these engagement scores. So we look at how are students interacting with campaigns, emails, text messages, forums, events, how often are they logging in, how recently have they done these things. Again, behavioral data to see what are the actions of students and how engaged are they. These are things that, again, help to inform what we're doing, what actions we're taking. And finally, to set things up for Mike, now that we've talked about data, we've talked about enrollment management, we've talked about the funnel, you can think about data in a lot of different forms. And so you can see 4 main ones here, all related to segmentation. Again, the idea that Ardis kicked off at the top is we want to personalize data. We want to be able to segment students to give them a message that's really tailored to them, their behaviors, their actions, who they are, what they're thinking, what they're doing. And so you can look at demographics, who they are, psychographics, what they're thinking, behavioral, what they're doing, and geographic, where they're coming from. Mike will go into a lot more detail about how this then relates to persona modeling.
Thanks, Damien. I'll take that. Good morning, everybody. How you doing? I'm Mike McGetrick again. I'm one of the principals at Spark 451. We're a sister company to Element 451. Really a company that Element originally came out with many years ago. Product was born there out of marketing and lots of connections to our admissions and enrollment roots as a company. And just so proud of where it's come to, how the product has developed over the years, and it's just so amazing what it allows you to do. And it gives me great pleasure to be here today to follow up on Wanda's presentation from yesterday about cohorts, which is really their special industry term for personas, right? And you think about the very large scale of a company like VaynerX and VaynerMedia, the incredibly large budgets and brands they were working with. They're enormous, tens of millions of dollars, most likely. And if you saw those different target audiences, those cohorts, you might say, my gosh, that is so enormous. How would I ever be able to do that? How would I ever be able to tackle something that enormous and complex? Well, you can actually do that with Element. You could actually get it done, and without an army of people. And hopefully, after today's session, you'll feel a little bit more comfortable about getting closer to that. And that's what we're hoping for here today. We work in about, I would say, 40 to 50 different instances of Element with various clients, helping them in various stages of marketing in the platform, and nothing does it better than Element. We work in other systems as well. You might be able to accomplish some of these things, but it takes a lot of code, a lot of different people. Element, we have the tools, we can drag and drop. We can actually accomplish these things ourselves and become marketing admissions superheroes. All right, on to the topic at hand, persona modeling. Great follow-up to yesterday's presentations and brings us closer to where we are in enrollment marketing. These are depictions, fictional in most cases, of the target audiences we're trying to address. We build them based on qualitative and quantitative data, and they help us to get better, more personalized marketing. So speaking about getting personal, this is Jasmine up here. It's someone I know very well, someone I know personally. She was a student of mine. I teach a course in digital marketing at NYU. And I know her a lot of things about her. I know her personally. She's 24 years old. She's studying marketing. She's in her first job. Her motivation for taking a marketing program as such. She's building her career. She worked in event management in her first job out of college and is looking to build that career. And I know where she lives. I know her really, really well. And I could actually, market to her really, really well because I know her very personally. But you can't know everyone that well, right? You can't know everyone in your prospects and cohort that well. So you need to have a model that allows you to abstract what you know about individuals into more generalized models that you can apply to larger cohorts. And that's what persona modeling allows you to do. It takes what you know about an individual and apply it to a larger group. So since we're going into personalization, I'm going to stop and pause for a little story about personalization gone wrong. A friend of mine works in marketing, true story. He lives in Brooklyn. And in the 2000s, Facebook introduced a feature called audience building. And what the feature was, a lot of you are probably very familiar with it, allows you to load a list of names into the platform to target a group of names. And he said, this is great. I'm just practicing his marketing techniques and building smaller and smaller lists. And he said, you know what? It'd be amazing if I could actually load a list of one person into this tool and see if I could target them. So he tried that on his roommate. Now, a little background on his roommate. His roommate was a performer in the Big Apple Circus in New York. And his technique was sword swallowing, believe it or not. And one other particular thing about him was that he was afraid to swallow pills. That was his thing. He was weird. So my friend invented this product that was you would spray on pills and you would help you swallow pills. So he created an ad campaign in Facebook targeting this kid alone, this roommate alone. And the ad said, isn't it ironic that you'll swallow a sword, but you're afraid to swallow a pill? So this guy seeing his ads on Facebook, he's like, how the hell do they know this about me? This is insane. And he eventually got paranoid and deleted his account, so it went wrong. But the point is that, it would be great if we could do that level of personalization. And Facebook actually figured out this loophole, eliminated it, and I think the minimum is probably about 100 names, is right? The minimum you can load right now, so yes. So they raised it from 1 to 12 to 25, and they figured we need to stop this and make it a little larger. So we need to develop more generalized models. All right. So, a lot of the ways we apply these are to academic programs, to cohorts in general, building on historical data. We may also, if the program doesn't exist yet, if a program's in development, we'll go to the faculty and say, hey, who are the model students you want to go? Who's your target audience? Who's the ideal student for your group? Get that information. And we apply these to lead generation, digital media campaigns, allowing our media department is here with us. They apply these personas to their digital media campaigns. Our e-com group is here with us. They apply them to specifics of the e-communications campaigns. And they can even be used for program development. You may identify some gaps based on people's motivations, based on people's pain points. You may notice a gap in your program. So you say, I could use a program in this particular area. We're missing this, or this aspect of our program is lacking. So sounds like a lot of work, right? It sounds like a lot of work that you're not going to be willing to put in, but you get a lot out of it. When you sacrifice in the beginning, you get a lot on the back end. Expediency, you might just say, hey, I'll just start targeting, but if you put in some work now, you'll get a lot of benefits on the end. So better segments for our personalization, getting some details in there that are going to fuel the quality of our campaigns. The journeys in particular, if people have problems, you want to know those problems, one of those pain points, and actually be helpful in the marketing to help solve those problems along the way. And finally, just knowing where to find the students. Vayner is all about the lead generation, that brand awareness at the top end, actually being able to locate students who are, the fit for your programs. It's going to really help you in that. All right. So there are quite a few dimensions that go into this. This is a great follow-up to what Damien was talking about before, these traits, trait engineering, all the individual pieces of data that we need to work with and consider to build these personas. And there can be lots of layers to them. And again, Element really does this better than anybody else, the ability to take all these dimensions, apply them to the various communications that we have, and personalize them. It's just amazing. So this is the way I like to look at it. When I'm building these personas, I look at my data requirements. And at the very bottom, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food and shelter, I need good demographics. I need to understand my data. Then I'll layer on a little bit about background about the groups, what kind of jobs they have, the career path they're looking for. Are they family? Are they graduate students? They have family? How are they older? Are they younger? Then a little further up the chain, what are the motivations and pain points that they have? And then other layers, the academic interest is very specific, right? The major, the specific concentration within a major. What stage are they in the funnel? What have they already done that I shouldn't be telling them to do things that they've done already? And considering that. And then finally, something we call signals, which are the behaviors they take in our platforms. Things that are related to activities, opening emails, visiting pages, using the Element pixel to identify activities across your microsites, your website, forums, etc. And using those as an additional layer to this. So this all tells us who and where they are, how we talk to them, and then when and where we can best connect with them, because we can connect to those activities. And plug, we do have another session later this afternoon on behavioral marketing, which will touch more on that. All right, so now this gives me two things that I can work with. My bottom three layers are what I consider my core persona. This might be what Wanda would refer to as her cohort, right? They share a common set of attributes that I can identify, that I can address, that I can abstract into a group that becomes marketable, targetable. Above, I have these individual features, feature engineering, right? That I need to address specifically to that person very, very accurately. All right, that person's interest is one-to-one. That person's funnel stage is one-to-one. And what they're doing, of course, is one-to-one, individual at the individual record. Abstracted, specific. All right. So far, so good? All right. All right, so actually getting our data, actually doing the work, we'll typically go with 3 years of enrollment data. We are subscribers to an Experian database that allows us to augment this data with third-party data. We can do like household income, we can go highest education of head of household, there are affinity groups we can apply to this. But typically, household income, home value, home ownership, highest education level in the household is very helpful for us. And we'll analyze and visualize this data. And that'll give us things like, descriptive data, age distribution, income distribution. This might be for a graduate program. What kind of career experience they have already. So that's my quantitative data. Now, qualitative data, quantitative data gives me good things, but I want to know more. I want to know these people a little more individually. Qualitative data we acquire from doing surveys, focus groups, personal interviews, using our own knowledge. We know things about our students. We know things that we can add to these flavors. These gives us their motivations. They give us great stuff. So some examples of my outcomes from qualitative data might be their motivators, right? Desire to help others for a Master of Social Work, being a top motivator, salary increases, changing my career, and giving us some insights as well. The good insights, right? I was looking for a career change, and the admissions counselor really, really helped me, gave me everything I needed to make an important decision. Gives me the bad things too. There's way too much homework. Tests are too demanding. You hear that too. So this gives us great insights that we can work with and build these. So I've got some examples here, and we can do at really deep levels of detail, filling in lots of data points. We can make them fairly basic with audience types, and then we can go, make a model individual. So we'll look at a few of these. So comprehensive personas, I'll just call them that, where we define a group of people as individuals. We'll identify location, their age groups, all the things we want them to know, everything that they need to know about that program, how they feel, what kind of apprehensions do they have going to this program, if any. Then there are audience type personas that we give names to. So this is for a tech-oriented graduate program. People are coming fresh out, or they're still undergrads, and they're looking to make an impact in a tech space, and the things they're looking for from our program. What kind of motivations do I have to give them? What are things that I can say to them that are going to be important for them relative to their interest? This might not be a large audience, but it might be an aspirational audience for this particular graduate program. We call them leading ladies. Women who aspire to be tech leaders, share the attributes that they share and the messages that we want them to take away. And then people who are actually working in the field right now, looking to attract to the same program. This particular program had an entrepreneurial focus, the big motivator being that you can incubate and start your own company. And so addressing this person's motivation. So these are really useful when you're sharing when you're sharing that targeting information to partners, your media marketing firm, the individuals in your campus who help you with marketing, giving them some idea of whom they're talking to and how they should talk to them. And then we may even abstract them even further to just give them a name and give them a story. And these stories can be fictional. They can be a sort of composite of all the different stories you've heard. And these are really, really helpful in giving a name, having empathy for these students, and building on that. So a few more. So just really putting a name to it, literally. All right. Now, adding to those other dimensions, depending on the funnel stage, right, where they are in the process, they might also have some particular needs, information needs, motivations. And so I'll think about these as well. And I'll think about how I'm going to want to talk to them. So, people who are at the top of my funnel, we might call them shoppers, right? In the case of a graduate school, they might just be kicking around, doing their research. And based on interviews I've had, based on discussions I've had, and the information gathering process, I've determined that these are some of the things I need to be able to answer and provide during that process. I'm going to use this for the ads I do, the initial emails. I might do a GRE search that's going to do these things. Someone inquires from my school. I'm at a different stage. And I've already decided I want to go to graduate school, but I need to know if this particular school has what I need. What are some of the things that can help answer those questions? Further down, I'm an applicant. Now I'm comparing schools one to another. Is this school better than the other schools that are in my selection set? get what I need out of it in relationship to the other schools. And finally, the people that I admit, the admits, the commits, outcomes, really. What am I going to get out of this? And these are the messaging points I'm going to want to address at that layer. What am I going to really get out of this? So I think about these things and layering them all together. And I want you to consider these, how to apply them. They're really only as good as applying them, and again, nothing does it better than Element. So some of the ways we apply them in our digital media campaigns, using our targeting, right? Being able to identify geographical areas, being able to identify interests. We'll add this information to our landing page that we're driving them to as well, and build a creative based around that. Our admissions counselors can use personas in Element in particular to have a better way of talking to people, know what their motivations are, know how to speak to them with a little more empathy. Make better recommendations for the problems that they have. And then an area that Element particularly shines in is in the personalization of the communications, right? The one-to-one at scale. So some of the things I like to talk about here are building roadmaps of e-communications flows, where there's a narrative that I want people to know. And that narrative is very personal to that person, right? It's about their story, right? Who they are and how I'm meeting them with what I have at my campus. So some of the individual personas might move through this e-communications flow and the particular subject I'm addressing and getting a personal piece of copy that's related to them, or a block of personalization in the communication in Element that's very specific to them, and the things they want. So a few more examples. All right. So I'm going to wrap it up with some practical things. This stuff is not super easy to do, but it's very, 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 very doable. And some of the practical tools that I use are roadmaps. And this example here, I'll actually build out a sheet that lists my personas I'm going to target, the data attributes I need, and then how I'm going to apply that data attribute in Element. So in this example, my leading ladies, I have data that I load, right, from GRE lists in this particular case, and I have gender available on that. So if I load that list, I can identify them. Now, if there's another person, I don't necessarily want to ask gender on my inquiry forms, but I do ask, a question about, are they interested in participating in the Women in Technology and Entrepreneurship program? And if they answer yes, we can add them to that group. And we don't necessarily call out the gender and the communications, but we really have content that's related to that. So we'll have content about female faculty who are doing amazing research and inject that. So the content piece is very important to that. So I'll build these out in spreadsheets, and I'll build them a little deeper. It goes down very, very deep here, but I'll build a narrative, set my communication flows, identify which of these, because you may not be able to do all of them, but I'll say I'm going to do my 4 audience types. You always have a default, right? Because some people may not fall into one actually. We add our layers, right? I have program-specific variations. I'm going to have 8 different master's programs related to this as well, so I'm going to need a variation for that. I'm going to add 7 different dynamic images based on each program. I'm going to have a funnel stage variation as well, right? Each person based on whether they're a prospect, applicant, admit, and add it all together. It's a lot. But it's not a lot when you do it in Element, because each of these blocks can be addressed individually by the program, by the stage, by the persona. And it becomes very, very doable and very, very tangible. Practically speaking, I won't show it, but we will write them in Google Docs. We'll have different sections for each one of the personas. There'll be individual copy blocks that are written out. And they get very detailed, but they're very, very doable. And one thing I'll say is, for sure, you can do this too. And I have a starter exercise that we don't necessarily have to do, but I want you guys to take it away. And there's a few, like, this is what I call my persona quick start template. So this allows you to sort of look at your campus, look at your school, your audience, your program that you work with. Create a quick start to that persona that you can sort of say, this is my persona. Then you can go do the research and build on it. So make sure we take this away before you leave today. And I'll wrap it up. And in closing, just say, this is worth it. You really need to understand your audience. We could give lip service to this, as a lot of people do. But it's worth your while to engage in this exercise to really understand who it is you're speaking to, whom you're serving, what are their needs, and how can you best meet them. Having that information for your faculty to really have them have an understanding of whom we're talking to, as well as your administration. So work it and then apply it in Element. Again, no platform does it better. So I'm so glad you guys are on it and that you'll be able to execute some of this we're talking about here. Final plug, 1:45 p.m. today, or 1:15 today, we have a follow-up. And it'll be very, very applied. All right, thanks all.
All right, so we have one more last section on how we are going to activate this in Element. I'll talk about that, and I'll actually, do a live demo in Element and how we can do that. But before I do that, I really want to stress out how important, this actually works. So Mike went really quickly through a lot of this, but the reason why we build Element was actually to get this stuff done in an easy way across a lot of different institutions. So we actually build Element to deploy, this framework and the persona approach. That's why the communications part in Element and the personalization is probably one of the more advanced ones, components. Obviously, other areas have caught up quite a bit, but it is one of the ones that we've always been ahead, and it's kind of light years ahead in terms of what's possible in other products as well. So keep that in mind, right? This actually works. We've been doing it for a decade plus, and it's one of those things where you have to put a little bit of work into it, but the outcome is so much greater, right? What you've heard about today is all about relevance, relevance, relevance. And what we learned yesterday is all of the why we need to do this stuff. It works, how we think about it, the framework. And then today, we're kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, here is some of the practical ways that we can kind of, get these things done. During a lot of the other sessions, like Mike said, we'll have some case studies and showcasing how this is actually done for RIT, specifically for a program. There's going to be other sessions that talk a lot about, things like the narrative, for example, on the like how important is narrative as well. So like, what's that story that you're telling? And of course, there's a lot of narrative that goes into those personas, like how you have those archetypes. And then Damien will have a deeper, he'll have some dashboarding, and he'll have some analytics an analytics product session as well to show you how we're kind of doing some work around bubbling up those those segments of those information. So anyway, so we can take a few minutes to see if we have any thoughts or questions, right? These workshops have been like us talking to you a lot, which is great. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, let's just bring some questions right now, and then I can go ahead and show you how this is done in Element. So there was a lot of stuff that was thrown out there. I think between Damien and Mike, there are both sections. There's just a lot of information. So let's open it up for some questions and make it a little bit more interactive. So who wants to go first? Nobody. Yeah.
You've given a lot of great examples, and most of them point to grad school.
Yeah.
There's a lot of community college folks sitting in this room. Would you talk a little bit about how that translates?
I would say when I think about this, and I'm sure Mike has thoughts on this as well, community colleges are so great for segmentation and personalization because they fill so many different roles and have such distinct reasons that students are interested in a community college. Again, we talked about all those different pathways that are possible. And so I think that it's natural for community colleges to look at segmentation, to try to identify, well, what are kind of the general reasons that someone would attend our institution? What are the things that we're known for? What are the things that we can provide? And again, through Element, and as Ardis will show in the demo, it's a good way to segment that audience, to identify those students, to add them into workflows, to automate that process. If these students have these demographics, if they have these actions in the system, we're going to group them into this is lifelong learners segment. And then from there, being able to activate it, being able to create this content, this copy, as Mike discussed, that really breaks up the content that they're receiving. That everyone has a standardized message, but here's something that really is specific for those lifelong learners. And so we gave graduate school examples, but I certainly think that it's something that's applicable really heavily to community colleges, four-year institutions, whatever your institution is, that there's ways to activate it.
Right. So Brian, what are some of the segments that you're going after right now? Maybe we can start from there and then think about, let's just workshop it.
No, I think I don't disagree with the point. I just want to hear what you
No. But
I mean, there's traditional high school seniors.
Yep.
Newly enrolled students as young as 9th grade. Lifelong learners, adult returners, people who have some degree, some credit, but no degree.
Right.
I mean, we can keep going. Those looking for 12 months or less into the workforce. Those looking to transfer to university.
So how are you targeting? So how do you know that what they're looking for? So maybe we can start from there. So Damien, I tell Damien, I'm like, okay, I need this. All right. So I guess what I'm trying to get to is we need to be able to identify them somehow. We need some kind of data point in the system. And one example that Mike gave before, where he said, well, we can't ask them about if they're male or their gender. However, we can ask them if they're interested in this program, which is targeted towards women in engineering. So my question to you is okay, you want to target this particular segment. Well, how do you know who they are? So you need to be able to collect some piece of data about them in order for you to identify if they're kind of fit into that program or not. Or maybe it's a combination of different questions. So right now, maybe we can go through a different example.
No, I think you're hitting on it, and I think in some ways you used it in the examples that you were talking about with grad school, which is what are the questions that are going to lead me to get to that? So what could you give us as some examples of leading questions other than something very targeted of, do you want this program for females? They can kind of start building that. So I work on the non-degree short-term training and workforce credential. I know I have students coming back who may have stopped out, need to finish, need to look at. How do I gather that information in a way that's not intrusive, puts them off, and doesn't put them on the spot and saying, hey, you weren't successful
technology as much as possible to gather that, rather than people power, right? Because obviously we know in that first point of gathering their lead, I want as minimum contact information as possible. I just want them to be able to raise their hand and make it super easy. But I want to know who they are, and I want to be able to use technology to get there rather than a human if I can.
Yeah. A 10-hour 115 session. Absolutely a 10-hour 115 session. All those questions will be answered at the 115 session.
Well, there we go. See how we're chaining every piece of the presentation together?
I was just going to say Christina Faller from RIT Certified is here in the front row. She's doing our 115 session with us. She runs a professional education unit for RIT and has answered some of the questions that we're talking about here in the case study we're doing.
Yeah. So it will go into more detail around what type of questions you're asking, how you're asking those. Like, are we building, from a technology perspective, it's very, very straightforward, right? It's like, okay, we need to gather that information. They raise their hand, we get their contact. Now we start the process of progressively gathering more information. That information can be in the form of, hey, we send them a 2-question survey, and then they answer that. Or we send them to a particular landing page and say, with content that's pretty generic, and then in that landing page, now we can ask them a couple of other questions, like, okay, why are you doing this? Or what's a motivator, or things like, I don't want to go into too much of that, but again, those are some of the things that they'll go over.
I want to be clear, I'm a believer. I mean, or you wouldn't be sitting here.
No, so this is a workshop, right? So we need to make sure that we're kind of working through those questions, and that's a great one.
And there's a segment we didn't talk about that we face, which is low to no motivation, or somebody else is my motivation. So that you use more motivation with that.
Yeah.
Versus grad school, that's a very different audience segment that we would have to think about.
Well,
I'll look for you to answer one of your things.
The reason why we use grad schools a lot, because it's very expensive to get somebody into grad school. Grad school is very expensive, and it's probably one of the areas where you need a lot of marketing to move that person, and it has to be very targeted and very personalized in order for them to actually, move along. So, MBA programs, I mean, you're spending 10,000 plus or more, even more, the minimum to get, in marketing to get somebody in the door on that.
7,500 on average.
So, all right, well, I was close.
Yeah.
7,500 on average. So, any other questions? Yeah.
You may cover this at 1:15, but I just wanted to clarify. So the cohorts and the personas that, especially the digging in yesterday that we talked about, do you recommend workshopping that out with your team and then deciding on all those personas before you start doing this progressive series of questions to find the people? So you already have identified a bunch of personas, and then you're trying to go out and find them, or are you asking them kind of a series of questions and you're building the personas based on who actually responds and who you're getting? Because our data right now is current recent students, unless we don't buy data.
Yeah.
And then whoever's going to come and fill out our form and kind of our targeted marketing that we do through digital advertising that we're buying, but we don't know everything necessarily that would develop this really targeted, this specific cohort.
Yeah.
So
I'll answer this one. So the form I handed out, that sort of like is your theory, your theoretical persona, right? You could model that and say, okay, I know this is one of my personas. This is single mothers who need to pursue a degree to get a better career, right? And that might be one of your personas, and you know that. And your team may actually have another theory about who all the personas are, and that may be accurate. And by going through the process of gathering data, looking at it, and then doing qualitative research, surveys, focus groups, personal interviews, you now actually qualify your theories, and you may develop others. With RIT, which we'll talk about later, we uncovered pockets of personas we didn't know about and didn't expect. And so I think just going through the process will be very revealing And because everybody has a theory, all the faculty will know exactly who their target audience is, and that there's thousands of them out there who just don't know about it because you haven't done your job yet. And they'll have a theory, but the data and the research will actually prove out whether it's accurate.
Yeah.
And then measuring down the road whether those personas are actually yielding, that's another story. So,
Right.
but yeah.
You really go through the workshop process of writing, and like you were talking about, it turns out to be a lot. You've got the Google document, you've written a lot of these little things. Are you going through that whole deal so that you can build that into elements so that you have that ready when that particular person happens to?
Right.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And I was going to say, Mike brought up a really good point that when you're doing these persona models or communication campaigns, you always want to have that default group. And going back to what I talked about with the enrollment funnel, at the top of the funnel, you might not have much information. You might have more students that are falling in as prospects into that default group. And then as you get more information, as they start interacting with the campaigns you have, maybe they go to a specific landing page that's targeted for one of those specific segments, those populations that you're looking for. And over time, they're getting this content that's still curated, still good, but now, okay, we have a good idea of who this person is, the actions that they've been taking. We can add them into this segment. We can add them to this persona and provide that more targeted information.
Yep.
And certainly it's an evolution as well. It's something that you create it once, and being able to provide that personalized content is a step in the right direction. And then you can regroup and say, was this accurate? Was this really targeting our groups? How did each of these personas, what were the trends that we saw? Were these messages effective for them? Or do we really need to revisit the groups that we've identified?
Yeah. But naturally, Natalie, I think there is you guys are targeting very different, like you have program-specific groups of students that are interested in specific programs. You have, you kind of have different offices. So I would start with just that level. It's like, just model that. Model the way that you are providing education, and those are your personas. Then you can go further and say, you know what, like this particular program or set of programs, we're finding that we have people who are a little bit different in there, and we need to talk to them a little bit different, right? But it's based on the people that you already have in your programs, so it's based on that data, right? It's not like you're not coming up out of thin air. Like nobody comes out of, and one of the things that Wanda talked about yesterday is that they need the data first in order to figure out who those people are, that the cohorts, so they can figure out who they are and who's interacting, so then they can build bigger and better campaigns. So that's why they do all those experiments, right? They have 30, 60, 300 different ideas or kind of, what did you call them, Mike? Feet? So they have all these different ideas, and then they're figuring out, okay, is this resonating, or is this brand resonating, or is this thing resonating? So they're collecting data first, and then they're looking at that and they're saying, okay, now that we have a better understanding of how this work together, then we can put that persona, and then we can give our creative team a better target or a better creative brief, so they can start building content that is targeted for that particular person. So in our case, it's very, very easy to do that because it's program, location, financial affordability, like all of these pillars, like all these 3-4 things that we have are the default way that we should start thinking about the persona. And then within those, I think there was a slide in here. So let me see really quick. Okay, here we go. So this is how you should think about it. You have academics. So you're dividing people based on their interest of academics. You have affordability, right? If you're concerned about affordability and you'll communicate different messages to people who are at different affordability levels, you have that persona in there, or you have that kind of personalization level. You have location. So location is the big motivator, big driver for how folks attend your school. You have folks who are out of state or who are going to be online or who are working full time and they're going to be online. You have people who are just first time freshmen who are actually they're looking for that campus experience. You have students who are out of state who might be living on campus. You have commuters. So you have all these different personas that you can build around location. And you guys know, like, this is like intuitively, like, we've been doing a lot of this, right? And then you have activities and activities that they might be doing, right? So in a lot of cases, for community colleges, probably depending on what kind of activities you have or what kind of opportunities you have, usually with a lot of partnerships, that's where you can ask those questions. Are you interested in this? Are you interested in this? And then you can tie that back to those activities. Academic and scholarship offers, I think that's a really big one, right? It ties back with affordability, but it also, you can look at that and say, are you interested in, if you have very niche scholarships, now people self-identify who they are based on, you saying that them opting into that particular, scholarship information. Faculty introductions. Now this is not really a persona in here necessarily, but it's tied back with academics, right?
It's an academic dimension to the persona.
Right, exactly. So it's just kind of the same. And the last one.
This is if they're like pre-law, pre-med.
Right.
Example.
So we just talk about the specific, like if they're interested in a specific kind of program or,
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to add right here, a practical note, is that this is you're going to have a generalized story narrative from your institution about this particular area and subject, right? There's a story you have about your location, right? And you're going to write you're going to write that in a generalized way. And there may be one paragraph, a block, an element, we call it, that we personalize for the persona or their location. And that's the part that you drill down on as a very personalized element. So you actually, it's approachable because you have to have the default, right? If you don't have a persona or don't have the location specifics, you have a default, but then you have a block level and element we could do, multiple personalization.
How about I show that?
Yeah, I was gonna say,
All right.
perfect time for the demo.
Yeah.
All right, so any other questions? Obviously, we'll have some more. We'll have a little bit more time. So I'm going to actually take a look here. All right, I'm going to show a grad school example again. Sorry for that. All right, so when we go to Element, for those of you who are familiar with Element, one of the things that we can do when we go to people is that we can start adding and segmenting based on a number of different dimensions. It can be anything from kind of location, right? So we can have address location data in here, and we can kind of say, okay, I want people who are 50 miles, 50 miles from campus, right? And you put your campus address and you figure out who they are and apply, and then you get 14 people in here, right? So we're getting those people geographically. So the location is one of them. Now you can overlay then in here again, you can come in and say, okay, I want those people, but then I also want, I want address, and I want the, if you're loading EPS codes from College Board or other things, or if you're doing territories differently, then you can kind of target them that way. But you can say state, and then we can have North Carolina in here as their address state, right? So we're now overlaying that. So we have a North Carolina as the address, and then if we don't actually have their geolocation address 50-mile radius, then we can kind of go to the state level. If we don't have that, then maybe we'll go to default. It will default it. So this is kind of how you do a segment that's targeting 50-mile radius with folks who are in North Carolina. Now you can save this segment for later on, and this is going to be live and be used all the time. So that's the way that we've kind of built elements, so we can kind of build these segments. Now I can go even deeper in here, right? So this is just a segment, North Carolina resident or North Carolina 50-mile radius from campus, right? That's the segment. But I can go in here and say, okay, you know what? I want to build 50-mile radius who are interested in a particular program, who are a particular stage of the funnel as well. Now, I can do that at the segment level, but I'm getting, if I go back to our presentation here, I'm actually mixing and matching now at the segment level, right? So when I try to do the location and when I try to do the academic, then I don't have the possibility of the content being different for each one of those. So the way that we do it then is we can build those segments in there to target them or to send communications one-off, but the better way in Element to do that is through our campaigns, right? And let me go back here really quick. So the way that we would do that is, let me see. So here's an example what Mike talked about. And again, I didn't mention it's a grad school. So here in Element, we have email and SMS messages. But now, rather than doing it at the segment level, we go to the communication level and say, OK, this communication is going to have different variations of content based on this different individualized segment. So we go to personalization. And then in here, now we can create those segments within the communication. So then we can mix and match content depending on where people fall in. So this makes it really, really powerful where we can now model things like, OK, we have the personalization or those segments or personas based on the funnel stage. We have a prospect here. So the way that we would model that is just a prospect. We would have somebody who's applied or who's started an application. And again, those are very simple kind of filters that we use. It's the same segment, but now we're building within communication. We go a little bit down, and then it's their program information, right? So if they're interested in a particular program. And the way that we do that is, you know what? Like they might be interested in that program at the prospect level. They might be interested in that at the application level. They might even be admitted as a particular student with that. So there's different data points that indicate academic interest in Element. So rather than us saying, OK, I want to prospect with this academic, we say, OK, anybody who's interested in this program, like I'm going to build that as a variable in here, or as a differentiation. Then we go down a little bit, and then we look at some of the other personas that Mike was talking about. It's things like, OK, are they a domestic student, or are they female? Now, under female, we can have their gender, but then we can add other fields in there that can be custom fields, those fields that you're collecting information for, right? So that question, if they're interested in a particular program or a scholarship or whatever other questions you might be asking in those forms, you can kind of combine those together, right? And that person is going to fall within that particular one. So that's how we're doing it. And of course, you're kind of looking at all of these different personas, right? Urban tech or whoever. So in this case, it's just based on major. But we have these personas. Oh, let me just go and edit this again. Now, what we can do is we have those different things, and then now we can target, we can personalize the content in Element based on that. We can personalize subject lines based on program information, for example. In this case, that's, let me see. So I think it's my default in here, but I'm going to go down to the actual content area. So what Mike was talking about is there's this components in here. So now let's say that I want to add a version of this for a particular program. I can go in and I can add an audience and I can say, okay, what kind of, if the person falls in one of those segments, I want to have them view this version of this content, right? So that's kind of how we tie in the segment that's in the communication to the version of the content that we want them to see. And we can go in and add them for anyone. So essentially, what you were building before in personalization, you're saying, I want to have all these different variations, or I want to have all these different conditions that people can be in, right? Or these different segments. And then the content, you go in and you build it, and you say, I want the content to, if they fall under this, I want this particular image to show up. So now that's the default image, but if I go to connected media, they have a different image in here, a different creative, right? If I go to health, they have a different creative in here as well. And if I have computer science, there's again a different creative in here. So this is the personalization at the communication level that can be done in Element, and it can be tied like so deeply now with everything that you can do in segmentation, right? In segments. So anything that you can segment, you can essentially create an audience for that, or you can create a variation of content based on that. And this becomes really powerful because now when you go down, you can say, okay, this content here was changed based on program. This content here is going to be changed based on those personas that I build, right? That first paragraph. So, you know, the image, like, depending on how you build your creative and how you think about it, is like the image is going to draw them in and keep their attention for just a little bit. And then they're going to scroll down, and then that's their motivators there, right? So it's like it's a domestic person, it's female, it's recent college grad. So you're introducing a piece of content around it. And then the action that you want them to take needs to be relevant to them as well. So you're not going to drive a prospect to submitting their application, right? Because they haven't even started one yet. You're not going to drive an applicant to learn more form because they already are past that. So you want it to be contextual to where they are in the process, right? So this call to actions becomes super important here. So in this case, we have different versions of this based on those funnel stages that we defined, right? So prospect, we're driving it to apply. And in Element, this becomes really easy because none of the URLs are necessarily hard-coded on these buttons, right? We can drive them automatically to be logged in with magic links to their application. So because we have their data, because we're sending them the email, we have that record in there, you'll automatically create a magic link and automatically log them into the application, removing a lot of friction to them to create an account and go through that. So it becomes really then, you know, they're like, oh, like you know, where I am in my process, you know that I'm interested in these things, and you know you're actually logging me in and removing that friction and making it a lot easier. So it becomes a better experience for them to go through, and a lot faster to go through that process. All right, so you have all these different things, and then you're like, well, how do I test these, right? Because I have like 10, like this can be now, like I have 5 variations in here, I have 3 call to actions, I have like 5, so it's like you multiply it. It can be like, in the traditional way, you would have 100 or 150 different emails, right? Because you have to write all these different variations. But now this is just one email, and you're just writing the pieces of content. You can go in here and you can say, hey, if I want to add one more program, you just add another image, right? You don't have to change anything. So when you can, you know, the way that you do it is like you can go in the preview and now say, okay, what does this look like for Johnny or for, you know, for Jamie, right? What does it look like for Jamie? So I can pull up Jamie, and then, you know, there is, you know, it fills in all their information. It picks, for example, it evaluates which of those segments or conditions Jamie falls in, and then it updates the content in here to reflect that preview, like what does it look like for Jamie. So when you create personas, in your case, you might have a couple of fake accounts and say, you know, Jamie leading lady, right? So that's one of the ways you can do it. Or you can create a custom field, and then now with our new profiles, actually add that custom field right there, right there on the profile or in the header. So you can actually see that as the persona. That's a good...
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out there is that Jamie Lee is a female, right?
Yes.
And that content in the first paragraph updated.
Yeah.
And it features 2 female students. So it's not addressing her specifically as a female, but the content is showing 2 female students who participated in a 24-hour studio sprint, and they did an Instagram takeover featuring that. So it's interesting content that's related to the persona that has an action to link out to. So that's another important dimension, is having good content, partnering with your, you know, teams on campus who can gather this information for you and create these content libraries that can feed this. And doing that at the program level, at the persona level is another dimension that's important to make this interesting, because it's not, even if we have personas that we write lame copy with nothing to link to, it's going to be lame. Right?
Exactly.
So having good content is good.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is, again, like, this is how you can preview it. And of course, we can kind of get rid of that and kind of test them manually, so you can say, okay, what does it look like for an electrical computer engineering where I have a domestic student in here, or maybe I want to have a current college student. So you can kind of test these things out in here in Element. Now, this is at the communication level. So when we go back to here, this is at this level. So you're personalizing it based on a couple of, based on you're going to have an academic email, but you're having sequences that you're keeping this person engaged, right? You're telling a story, and most of the campaigns are usually done around that. So you want to keep them engaged, and you want to keep them telling them a story. You don't want to dump 6, 7, 10 paragraphs into one email, right? You're going to keep it very, very concise, and you want to keep those communications very short. Single purpose, right? Just linking out to different things if that's something you want to do. But now when you come in here, you're like, okay, well, how does that work if I want to orchestrate all of this? And you can do that. So if I go back here, you can do that with workflows, right? So workflows are really the orchestration level that does that. And if I go to workflows really quickly, I'm going to pull up. Let me see. Did I click it? Hope my Wi-Fi didn't crap up. All right, here we go. So, all right, so I'm going to open up. I'm going to open up a workflow in here, and this is actually a workflow that's built with PACS, right? Now, we don't know a lot about your personas, but there's a foundation level of personalization in PACS at the individual email level that you can now build on, right? So with PACS, and I think there was a session yesterday around PACS, you can install this senior search campaign or sophomore, junior, or basically to get a blueprint of how we're doing this. So it will install this workflow. It will create all of the emails for you. And the content you might want to go in and change, or actually go in there and add different variations. And so we give you a good foundation for all of that. So in here, what Workflows does, it's essentially now sending that first introductory email, and it's saying, okay, basically it's pulling in, it's doing exactly what this picture is telling us, right? The first one might be an intro one. The second email is probably going to be around, in this case, will probably be around academics or affordability. And as you look at this, you're essentially having, in this case, it's apply, right? Because we want to drive them to that call to action right away. You're talking about careers, student life, academics. But these can be different stages of your story, or how you break up, or what kind of communication you want to, how do you want to break it up? How do you want to break up that campaign? We don't really usually recommend having really long campaigns. Maybe 4 or 5 series are usually best. And then you can kind of keep repeating that depending on what kind of actions they're taking, or if they're taking that actions. If they're not responding within that, we don't want to bombard them with communications. So this is basically doing something where it's saying, hey, if this person actually took this action, then I want to enroll them in a different workflow, right? So now I want to enroll them in a different workflow to essentially get them to do something, a different action. But anyway, so you're sending these communications, you're kind of putting this kind of steps together, and it mirrors exactly the different steps of econ flow that we're talking in here. So think about the flow, like the series as a workflow, and think about, I'm going to send this communication, the topic is going to be affordability, or the topic is going to be location, the different options that we have for location, and then based on the persona that you built around that, you're varying the content based on that, right? So don't try to combine too many things together, right? Because that becomes really, really hard to conceptualize it and to even think about it in a, when you put them together, right? Of course, you want to have people that fall in, but when you're going to the activation part, right? The person can be pretty complex, or the persona can be pretty complex, but when you go to the activation part, you want to break that down, right? You want to break down how you're communicating to them at a particular topic level. All right, I think that's kind of all I had to show, and that's what we had to show you. So hopefully this gives you a lot of ideas on how to do it. Questions? Yeah.
Question about affordability here.
Yeah.
What field are you using in the system to differentiate on that?
Household income, maybe. We can use, there's custom questions that can be added as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, when we do data, we'll typically enrich it with household income, which we acquire from third party.
Yeah.
So Experian in this case. So we just run it through a filter, it gets added, and we can segment on that.
Some people might say, hey, you know what, we're need blind, and everybody can come to our schools no matter how much. But we all know that sometimes you need to understand that motivator to kind of motivate them even further to if they need more help or not. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
How long would you all spend building the campaign, the campaign pack, and then as we're thinking about for clients to build it, how long would you expect them to build it? They had to build it to know how much time saving goes into it.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, how much time did we take to build a pack that actually has all those emails together? And then how much time do you guys need to actually, create that? So it took us a long time. Actually, it took us 10 years to think through like that, that whole process. So it's like a doctor, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to get paid a lot of money because of the half-hour kind of surgery that I'm doing, but it took me a really long time to kind of learn that. So it took us a really long time to kind of break it down that way and kind of figure that out. It took us, a couple of months to actually build, those packs in Element because we had to write the content and all that. Now, for you, it really is, maybe like 10 seconds to install and to enable that pack. So you can kind of run it, and then you get 80, 85%, maybe 90 if you don't need a lot of different segmentations to the way to enabling. So if you don't want to make any changes, you can just enable it, and you can go from installing it to actually activating it in less than a minute. Now, again, we don't necessarily understand the nuances of each institution, so that's why you have to go there, and by default, we have it inactive, that workflow, so you can go in and now start adding your own little flavor of your targeting, of your kind of segmentation, and so on and so forth. Any other? Terrence?
Most of the examples that we've talked about this morning really are from the recruitment perspective.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about expanding our use on the retention side.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some very specific metrics around our populations to get them through the enrollment first year, I guess.
Yeah.
Enrollment. Do you have any examples, or do we take this model in terms of Conflow and build out like academic supportability locations with that ER metrics for student success, and then we create personas to walk us through communication that way? Am I thinking correctly or not?
Yeah, I think so. I think if we looked at that pyramid again, you would add a dimension on what you have for student success, right? So let's see, let's go up here. Yeah, so right here. So I'd probably, on a retention model, add another layer that are my metrics for student retention, right? So maybe it's just how are they doing, right? There's segments based on that you need to address in order to retain them, right? Like their Like maybe let's
GPA, how well they're
Doing-
doing,
yeah,
know,
doing-
class completions,
We
like,
have student learning outcomes, like non-academic and academic SLO.
Right.
21 points. So we're monitoring that to trigger certain supports.
Yes.
throughout that first year.
yeah. So you do exactly the same thing, but now you can activate it in a persona. You can kind of add that as a persona component, right? And if there's certain populations that you want to talk a specific way, now you add that as another variable in there, and you say, okay, if the person falls between this range on that academic, success area, and they are, they're female or they're part of a particular program, then you kind of put those things together, and that's your persona. That's how you think about it. And then you drive messaging. It's like, okay, what would a counselor do actually? Like, that's probably a good one, right? What would a counselor do if they're in this range and they're a particular person that's in front of them? Like, what are the actions? What are the best practices? And then you take that and you say, okay, now we're going to automate all of that, and we're going to drive them. Like, if the system knows all these data points, automatically we can build a communication, and we can now add the links and drive them to the resources they need, or add the internal workflows to create, let's say, a task for somebody to reach out to that person and kind of follow up with them.
Yeah, and you're going to want to load that data into
Yeah.
Element to trigger those messages.
Yeah.
And also, message the whole range, right? Students who are doing really well, congratulate them and encourage them to
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah.
And then have the students who aren't doing well, encourage them to seek, remediation and help.
There's also, like everything we've talked about, I think there's a lot of different approaches that you can take. If you want to get really granular, you could look at all 21 of those. But as I talked about at the start, you could do scoring and determine, here are the top high impact practices that we want to make sure to identify, or, here are the characteristics. So I want to look at, have they been attending tutoring sessions? Have they been attending on-campus events? What's their GPA? Or, how many midterm warnings do they have, or something like that. You can identify specific actions and go based off of that. So it could be, again, really simple, really granular. The combination of workflows, dynamic content, as long as you put the data in the system, you can really choose what that looks like on the campaign level.
So just, we didn't talk about this yesterday, but one of the things that we've added to Element is the ability to load in courses and course activity. So now we talked about moving into beyond enrollment, and we need a lot of the signals from other systems, like an LMS or an SIS. So a person takes a course, they start a course, they complete a course, they get a grade or that changes. We're able to load those activities in Element and be able to filter and segment based on that now. So we actually need, the motivator was RIT, because we were taking some of the data from edX, this non-traditional data, and we needed to segment those users based on the courses they took. But now, as we're moving beyond enrollment, we can load that activity data from the LMS or the SIS, and you guys can start segmenting based on course completions or non-completions, because we have the ability to do that.
What about a data point like attendance or earlier load?
So we haven't added attendance yet, but as we're expanding towards that, we're adding more of those signals in. So those custom activities, or those activities will be coming, but they're not there right now. But this is there right now. We need to, if you're interested in it, just let us know if we need to work with your LMS or your SIS to kind of bring in that data in. Because right now, it's not like you can't just load it in. We have to connect it to your SIS in order to bring that data in. It has to be done through. And it will just show up in the student's activity feed, very similar to how they're doing, how you're working with an email or so I can go to their activity feed, and then I can actually, I have courses in here now, right? So you can see all the courses that they took, when they register, or all the activities around courses, when they registered, when they didn't register. And the way that we're also keeping track of that is that under data sources, we now have added courses, as a new data model in there in addition to programs, right? Programs is a higher level because everything around enrollment is around programs. But now we've added courses, so you can kind of target them at that individual level. So you can load your courses, and now they're referenceable, right? So that activity that's coming in is going to reference a course here, and then we're able to show you much richer data in the profile because we know what that course is, we know what the subject is, the number, the type, and so on and so forth. So we're merging, those components together.
Awesome.
There's a little sneak peek, or not sneak peek, but just a feature unveiling there. Yeah. Any other questions? I think maybe we have time for one more. All right. Well, hopefully this was useful. We will break we have a little bit of a longer break, maybe about 25 minutes or so, 30 minutes. We're going to divide the room, and then we have 2 lab sessions. The lab sessions, originally, we were going to have 1, but because of the interest around the topics, we decided to have 2 of them. We're getting a lot of interest and inbound feedback. One of them is going to go into some detail around Zapier and the automation, the integration automations with Zapier. Like, how do you connect different things together, right? You're working with different systems. How do you connect? When something happens in Element, how can you send a message to Teams? And how do you send Google Sheets data to Element and create users because in real time, right? So we're going to talk about a couple of those examples as well. Talk about what Zapier is and kind of how we're thinking about that. The other session is going to be about tagging. Well, Google Tag Manager specifically, right? So you're working with a lot of social media accounts. You have things like pixels and conversions. You're perhaps working with a marketing agency. And the question that we get a lot is, how can we send those signals that are happening or actions that are happening in Element to let the social media platforms know that this person who they sent over to Element now actually completed some kind of action, and that's a conversion, right? So in Element, well, you can send that data to a lot of other places as well, right? But Google Tag Manager is a really great way for you to manage external kind of services or analytics, and then we have a deep integration. Well, we have an integration with them that we send all those events that are happening from the user side to Google Tag Manager. So rather than me kind of explaining it, I think the team will do a good job in our next session. But both of those are very important around marketing, right? So marketing automation with other systems, and kind of the digital advertising, tagging, automation as well, on the other sessions. So take a half-hour break, and then come back, and then the next, you'll go through the.
Specific times for it.
Brendan has all the specific times, so I'll let him do his thing.